Story 1. The Haunted Dorm Room. I was a freshman at a small college in the Midwest. The dorms were old and had been around since the 1950s. I was assigned to a room on the third floor, and although it was small and a little rundown, I was excited to start the semester. Everything was fine for the first few weeks. I quickly made friends, adjusted to my classes, and even joined a couple of clubs. But then, strange things began happening in my dorm room. It started with small, unexplainable incidents. One night I woke up to the sound of faint tapping on the wall behind my bed. I thought it was just the pipes, or maybe someone in the next room. But when I asked my neighbor the next day, he said he hadn't heard anything. A few nights later, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard the tapping again. This time it was coming from the closet. I got up and opened the closet door, expecting to find some kind of animal or maybe something that had fallen, but it was completely empty. I brushed it off, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. Things escalated quickly after that. I started waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone whispering. The voice was faint and muffled, like it was coming from inside the walls. I could never make out the words, but it sounded like someone pleading or crying. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination or stress from school. One night, however, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I woke up suddenly, and there was a cold breeze in the room, even though the window was shut. My eyes darted to the closet door, which was now slightly open, even though I always kept it closed. As I stared at it, the whispering began again, soft and desperate. My heart pounded in my chest as I got out of bed and walked slowly toward the closet. As I reached for the door, the whispering stopped. I yanked the door open, and there, huddled in the back of the closet, was a shadowy figure. Its form was vague and dark, but I could see its eyes, pale and empty, staring directly at me. I stumbled backward, slamming the door shut, and ran out of the room. I didn't go back that night. I crashed at a friend's dorm and told him everything. The next morning, we went to the dorm supervisor and explained what happened. To my surprise, she didn't seem shocked at all. In fact, she seemed reluctant to talk about it. After some pressing, she finally admitted that there had been incidents in that room before. A few years ago, a student had died in that very room, an apparent suicide. I moved out the next day and I haven't set foot in that building since. But even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear faint whispering like the voice followed me out. Story 2. The Late Night Stalker. During my sophomore year in college, I lived off campus in a small apartment complex about a 15-minute walk from the main campus. It was a quiet area, mostly students living there, and I felt safe. That was until one night when I was walking back from a late-night study session at the library. It was nearly 1 a.m., and the campus was almost deserted. As I walked down the dark street toward my apartment, I noticed a figure standing at the far end of the road. The person was barely visible under the dim streetlight, but it seemed like they were staring right at me. I thought it was a bit odd, but I brushed it off and kept walking. As I passed under the streetlight, I glanced back to see if the person was still there, but they were gone. I felt a little uneasy, but I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. Then, as I turned the corner to my apartment complex, I heard footsteps behind me. I looked back again and saw the same figure walking down the street, slowly but deliberately. My heart started racing. I quickened my pace, and so did the footsteps behind me. I was almost at my apartment door when I turned around again and saw the figure much closer now, his face barely illuminated by the flickering light above the door. It was a man, tall and thin, with dark clothes that seemed to blend into the night. His eyes were wide and there was a twisted grin on his face. I hurriedly unlocked my apartment door, slammed it shut behind me, and locked it. I peeked through the peephole, but the man was gone. I checked all the windows and made sure everything was locked before heading to bed. I had almost convinced myself it was just some creep messing around when I heard it, a faint tapping on my window. My stomach sank as I crept toward the window, barely pulling back the curtain to look outside. The man was standing there right outside my window, staring at me with that same twisted grin. I froze in terror as he slowly raised his hand and pointed directly at me. I pulled the curtain shut and backed away, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. The police arrived within minutes, but by the time they got there, the man was gone. They searched the area but found no trace of him. For the next week, I stayed with friends, too terrified to sleep in my apartment. When I finally went back, I found a note slipped under my door. It was a single piece of paper with one sentence written on it. "I know where you live." I moved out the following month, and I haven't walked home alone at night since. Story 3. The Basement Ritual. During my senior year, I was part of a small, close-knit group of friends who were all fascinated by the paranormal. We'd often go ghost hunting in abandoned buildings or visit allegedly haunted places near campus. One night, we heard about an old, unused basement under one of the oldest lecture halls on campus. It was rumored to be haunted, and since it was the end of the semester, we thought we'd check it out for fun. The basement was officially off limits, but we managed to find an old service entrance that wasn't locked. As we descended the creaky stairs, the air grew colder, and the faint smell of mildew filled our noses. The basement was pitch dark, and we had to use our phone flashlights to see. As we explored the dank, narrow corridors, we stumbled upon a heavy, rusted door at the far end of the basement. It was partially open, and behind it was a large, dimly lit room that looked like an old storage area. But there was something else in the room, an arrangement of old wooden chairs set in a circle, with strange symbols painted on the floor. In the middle of the circle lay what looked like an old, worn-out book. We were all uneasy, but curiosity got the better of us. One of my friends, Chris, picked up the book and started flipping through the pages. It was filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and strange symbols. As he read aloud from one of the pages, the temperature in the room seemed to drop even further, and a faint whisper echoed through the basement. Suddenly, the heavy door slammed shut behind us, making us all jump. We tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the whispers grew louder, and we could hear faint footsteps approaching from somewhere in the darkness. We frantically searched for another way out when Chris stumbled and dropped the book, sending a cloud of dust into the air. At that moment, the whispers stopped and everything went silent. Then, a deep guttural voice echoed through the room saying, "You shouldn't be here." The lights on our phones began to flicker, and a dark figure appeared in the corner, slowly advancing toward us. We finally managed to force the door open and ran up the stairs as fast as we could, not looking back. When we reached the surface, we locked the service entrance behind us and sprinted back to our dorms. We never spoke of that night again, but Chris kept the book, despite our warnings to get rid of it. A few weeks later, Chris started acting strange. He became withdrawn, claiming he could hear the whispers even when he was alone. He started missing classes, and eventually dropped out before graduation. The last time I saw him, he looked haunted, like he had been living a nightmare that never ended. None of us ever went back to that basement. It remained sealed off, but every now and then, students whisper about strange sounds and cold drafts coming from below, like something still lingers down there, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too deep.